Thank you very much, and thank you for joining me this Sunday evening to listen to me. I am a marketer and a writer. All my professional life I have been a marketer, and later in my career I have also picked up writing and become a writer. Now that's good, because I either write books, and after I finish writing books I have to market them, and I'm often wondering which is the more challenging thing to do. And then I realized that there's a TEDx stage which is even more challenging. So ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a story. For 37 years now, I have worked with the Tata Group. It's been my first job out of college. About 12 years back, after marketing various things, after marketing tea and coffee and jewelry and watches, about 12 years back, I wanted to write a book. And I had no clue how to write a book. I had never written a book before. So what do? I wrote an email to a very senior director of the Tata Group. His name is Mr. Gopalakrishnan. Let me call him RG for the sake of this discussion. I wrote an email to him saying, "Sir, can I come and meet you and understand how to write a book?" I really had no hope of getting an answer to that email. But he's a busy man. He was on the boards of many companies, RG. He was the vice chairman of some companies. I really had no hope of getting an answer. But in 3 days, I got a reply from him which said, "Harish, come to Bombay." I was in Bangalore those days. "Come to Bombay and meet me and let's chat." So I thought I'd probably get 15-20 minutes with him. I prepared my questions. I went to his office. It was a grand office in Bombay House, the headquarters of the Tata Group. And Mr. Gopalakrishnan looked at me and said, "Sit down. Don't be tense, tell me what you want to write about." And then for 1 hour, he spent 1 hour with me telling me about how to write a book, telling me what stories I could cover in the book. He was an accomplished author himself, so he was talking from experience, telling me what the length of the book should be, telling me how I should structure the book. And I said, my God, here is a senior director of the Tata Group spending all this time with me, a manager, advising me how to write a book. And then I started writing my book. I took a sabbatical for a few months. I sat in the library of the Tata Management Training Center in Pune and started writing the book, researching it and writing it. 4 weeks down the line, Mr. Gopalakrishnan RG lands up in the library of where I was writing the book. And he spends 2 hours with me, looking at the progress I have made, discussing what I have done well, not done well, and what I should do better for the rest of the book. And then eventually, he also agrees to write a foreword for my book. And that book was my first book, Tata Log. Ladies and gentlemen, I came out of that episode thinking, what a man this is. He's amongst the senior most people in the Tata Group. He's chosen to take several hours to help me to write this book, which was my burning desire and my passion. And let me tell you, it was not just intellectually fulfilling, it was emotionally moving for me to see that a senior person could spend so much time with me in helping me pursue a passion that I wanted so badly to do. And I will come to an epilogue of that story later. But to me, this demonstrated a very critical attribute which I think all managers, all leaders require today, the attribute of generosity. Now, RG didn't give me money, but he gave me something which was even more valuable. He gave me his time, he gave me his knowledge. And when I went back to the Tata Group after my sabbatical to work once again, I was on top of the world. I was so motivated that here is a group which does this for you and which supports you with the gift of generosity. That's the subject of my topic today, the amazing power of generosity, both big and little things. In my 37 years, ladies and gentlemen, I have worked with over 2,000 professionals of all colors and hues. Within the teams I have worked, with agencies I have worked, with other third parties that I have worked with, many of these professionals have been very, very successful people. All the successful professionals I have worked with exhibited the things that you normally associate with successful professionals: expertise, passion, determination, all these attributes they had. But then there were a few professionals who not only exhibited these attributes, but people whom I not just respected, I truly admired and loved. There were a few professionals I truly admired and loved. And these are professionals with whom I would go back and work again and again and again as members of their teams or as their colleague or as their peer. But what set them apart? These were professionals who had expertise, they had passion, they had determination, but in addition, ladies and gentlemen, they had the very, very critical attributes of kindness and generosity. To me, generosity is one of the least valued attributes in organizations and corporates today, whereas it's perhaps the most important attribute of a team player or a leader. And why is generosity so important? Why does generosity make all the difference? First and foremost, because generosity breeds trust. What did RG do when he spent time with me? He was telling me, I'm here for you, I'm here to support you. When your colleagues get that message from you that I'm here for you, I'm here to support you, there is no better way to build trust amongst teams and within organizations. Not only does generosity build trust, it builds deep connections. Because generosity says, I understand what you need. I'm not being generous and giving you something you don't need. I'm giving you something that you need, for which I have to understand what you need. So generosity builds deep connections because it says, I understand what you need. Not only does generosity build trust and deep connections, generosity elevates people around you. People start flying because generosity makes people motivated. I came back from that sabbatical of book writing very, very motivated because of the generosity I saw that the group and RG had extended towards me. Not just motivation, generosity also heals. Sometimes things go wrong between individuals, and generosity helps to heal past wounds. And finally, generosity doesn't just stay with you. If one member of a team is generous, it is one of those attributes which spreads, which is infectious. If one member of a team is generous, many more members of the team start becoming generous. And this I have seen again and again and again. So generosity has a ripple effect. It creates even more generous behaviors and positivity in the entire team. So for all these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that generosity is a very, 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 very important attribute of leaders across the world, in India and across the world. It breeds trust, it builds deep connections, it elevates the people around you, it heals, and it has a wonderful positive ripple effect across your team. But let me just emphasize here, I'm not talking of large acts of generosity. I'm not talking of monetary philanthropy and generosity. I'm talking of simple, small and big acts of generosity towards your colleagues, towards your peers, towards your team members, towards everyone that you interact with. What do I mean by that? How can you exhibit such generosity? You can exhibit such generosity first and foremost by listening deeply and seriously. The very act of listening is a generous act on your part because you're giving your time and attention to listen. You're not fiddling with your cell phone or sneaking at your cell phone messages while you're talking or listening to someone else. You're listening to them with dedication. That is an act of generosity because you're giving them your time. You're being generous when you share information with your colleagues, friends, team members, rather than holding that information by yourself. You're being generous when you share your knowledge with your colleagues and your team members. Share as much as you can. I'm not saying you share proprietary knowledge, but sharing knowledge as much as you can. You're being generous when you support your colleagues. You can be generous by supporting your colleagues, sometimes opening doors for them. You know someone and your colleague wants to contact that someone, you open the door and let him contact him. That's generosity. You're being generous when you provide emotive support to your colleagues, when they're going through a tough time, when they're going through a tough patch, and that works equally well in this college and not just in organizations. You can also be generous towards your colleagues, not just by listening, not just by sharing, not just by supporting your colleagues. You can also be generous to your colleagues with unexpected acts of generosity which delight people. An unexpected call to ask a person how he is doing. And let me reflect on some of these acts of generosity which have impacted me greatly. I have a colleague who reads very extensively. He knows that I like reading business books. And every year, he gives me a list of the best business books that I should read. That is generosity. because I don't have to filter through such a list myself. I can tell you of another colleague who senses when someone in the office is very upset. And then she goes across, when she senses that someone is very upset, sits down and has a cup of tea with that colleague, a cup of tea or coffee. That is an act of generosity. It's a simple act of generosity. It requires 10 to 15 minutes of your time and 2 cups of coffee and tea to sit down and chat when someone is upset, to relieve their upset. I can tell you of my first boss in the Tata Group. He was already the CEO and MD of the company. He was based in Kolkata, who traveled 2,300 kilometers by a hopping flight to attend my marriage in the coastal town of Mangalore in South India. That's an act of generosity that I have not forgotten across my career. So all these, ladies and gentlemen, are acts of generosity. They can be simple, small acts like listening, sharing, supporting, opening doors, attending weddings, having a cup of tea, talking to someone on the telephone. These are unexpected acts of generosity which delight people, and expected acts of generosity which also delight people. So let me tell you this, that cultivating behaviors of generosity can be one of the best things that all of us do to ourselves and to the colleagues that we work with. Generosity is underrated. You know, expertise, passion, even humility, there are articles written about it, there are papers written about it. I believe that these attributes are important, but sometimes they're overrated, whereas generosity is underrated. Generosity not just is motivating to the receiver, but let me tell you that generosity also makes the giver very happy. It's very fulfilling to the giver. The act of generosity and doing something that your colleague wants or your team member wants or a person you're interacting with wants or even a stranger wants. Generosity is very, very fulfilling and makes the giver happy too. Ladies and gentlemen, that is why I feel that generosity has amazing powers. There are amazing powers in the acts of generosity that you can perform. I believe that expertise and passion will transform human beings, will transform all of you into great professionals. That's why you're here in this college, to study and pick up expertise. And when you combine that with passion, it transforms human beings into great professionals. But I also believe that generosity elevates great professionals into even greater human beings. That is the amazing power of generosity. But let me, before I end, you heard me narrate that story of RG and his generosity towards me in writing my very first book. And I have a small epilogue to that story. The small epilogue is that that book that he was generous enough to guide me with, which I would never have written perhaps without his help, went on to become a national bestseller, is currently in its 25th reprint, and then I have written many other books as well, some of which have gone on to become bestsellers. But over these years, that act of generosity has built a great deal of trust between RG and me, and I would think also a deep connection between both of us as authors and writers. And that trust and that deep connection led last year to both of us co-authoring our most recent book, which is just about to be launched next month. So that's what generosity does. It can be a catalyst for great behaviors in the future that you will never be able to predict. And that's what generosity has taught me. Generosity can have unintended effects, which will be beneficial both to the receiver and to the giver. And it's such a privilege this year to have co-authored that book with him. Ladies and gentlemen, all I want to submit to you is that generosity has amazing powers. Utilize them and engage in those small, simple acts of generosity which will elevate you, elevate your colleagues, elevate your team members, elevate everyone that you work and live with. Thank you very much for giving me a very patient hearing.